Hi friends, this is Caitlin. Welcome back to ScrapbookPal's YouTube channel. Today we are going to be making a Christmas card a little bit early, and to get into the spirit I'm going to be using the Festive Foliage Thinlits from Sizzix, which is this one right here, as well as the Festive Dictionary Definitions. And this stamp set is so fun. It's a really cool way to have a festive sentiment that isn't just like Merry Christmas. I just thought it was really unique and I really enjoyed creating with it. So we're going to start out by die cutting all of our little foliage bits here. I'm going to cut a couple extra, some ones that I didn't end up using, but I figured it was better to have too many than not enough. So I'm going to be cutting extra layers as well of both sizes of the poinsettia. So keep that in mind, that these are really fun to layer up and kind of make them your own, or you can just do a single layer and let it be a little more simple and kind of clean lined looking. Just depends on what style you prefer. So once I got all of my dies laid out, I went in with the Spellbinders tape just to hold everything in place. This yellow tape is one of my all-time favorites. I use it every single time I die cut. I'm gonna need a new roll soon. So I'm going through and just taping, two at a time down just to hold everything clear. And then just to save us some time, I did a lot of my die cutting off screen. So we will just jump on ahead, and I've kind of made everything into piles. Now for my background, I decided to pull in this new embossing folder that's absolutely beautiful. This is from Sizzix as well. It's the Crackle. Technically, I think this is part of their Halloween release. Now, if you know anything about me, you'll know that nothing fits my personality more than adding Halloween into my Christmas card. But you can see this just gives a really beautiful kind of wood grain, crackly bark texture. And I think that it works really well with this rustic kind of Christmas foliage look that we're building anyway. So I used some craft cardstock and that embossing folder, and now just to enhance that texture, I'm going to go in with my Gathered Twigs Distress ink on a foam blender, and I am just doing a really light kind of even wash of that color. That's just going to help to pull out those high points, and all of the little creases and divots will kind of stand out. This is really easy because you don't have to worry about getting a smooth blend. Nothing about this background is smooth anyway, so it was a very stress-free and fun to just kind of go to town blending this ink on. I did try to darken up the edges just a little bit extra versus the center to give me kind of a halo vignette look. And now we are ready to start blending all of our foliage. Because I knew that I was going to be layering up my poinsettias or poinsettias, I decided to go in first with a pretty light hand, and I am using the Catherine Pooler Mini Inks. This is a terracotta color. You can see I grabbed the rouge as well, but I ended up not going with that. The only flower color I end up with in my final project is that terracotta, and I think that it works perfectly. I started all of my blending in the center of each flower, and using small circle motions just blended that ink out using these 1/2 inch Pinkfresh Studio brushes that I think are just perfect for this kind of project because they're big enough that it doesn't take forever and small enough that you have so much control. For the second bottom layer of each set, I added extra ink, really deepening up that center area and carrying that darkness out a little bit further, so that way when the petals are lined up and layered up, you can still see that extra definition underneath. And I am going to be making 2 of each size of these flowers. So I have 2 of the larger ones, 4 total pieces, and then 2 of the smaller ones, 4 total pieces of those as well. Just as easy as it was to go ahead and die cut these, I thought it would be really impactful to have them layered up. But like I said before, this is definitely not necessary, and in the inspiration pictures on the packaging, they have it as a single layer and it still looks absolutely beautiful. I had a lot of fun kind of playing around with how much ink to add to those bottom layers. And then I grabbed the Sage Catherine Pooler ink for all of my foliage. I'm going to use that same color for everything. Again, I had intentions of pulling in a deeper green, but once I started blending, I felt like I could get a pretty good range just depending on how much ink I was applying. And I definitely went over the stem and bottom areas of the leaves a little bit extra, again, just to build that little bit of depth. But once everything's layered in, it all kind of just melts together a little bit anyway. And I really loved how simple and clean it looked having a smaller color palette. I did the exact same thing for the smaller leafed branches. You can see up in the top of the screen, I did shade in some of those berries. They just did not end up fitting in well with the end layout that I had in mind, but I did save these and I do intend on using them down the road. For those, I used a Copic marker to shade in the stems. So if that's something that you are interested in, even for these other leafy elements, if you wanted the stems or the branch parts to be a wood color or to match with your background, maybe you could easily go in with a Copic marker and just shade that area in. The pine needles were the most difficult part, and that was just because I had to be really mindful with how I was moving my brush. I had been very used to doing these small circular motions, and these pine needles are very fragile and thin. Nothing tore or was bent or, beyond repair, but I did have to be careful to start blending in the same direction as the paper was going, which obviously makes sense when you're working with a more delicate die cut, but it was just something that didn't occur to me after, being able to blend so easily on those bigger, chunkier pieces. For the center of the flowers, I ended up going in with the Shea Butter ink, using a very, very light hand for the flower centers, and then a heavier hand on the stars. I also grabbed this little pick just to help me hold the stars in place. You could also save the cardstock pieces that you cut these out of and use those to kind of puzzle piece them back in and hold them in place. But I wasn't thinking about that when I started, and I had already folded them up and thrown them out. So I just had to make it work, and I didn't want my fingers kind of in the way. So there we go. Use what you've got around you. At one time, I even used a pair of scissors to just kind of hold them down in place. Anything will work. The eraser on a pencil is also a pretty good solution to that. So I took my Lawn Fawn precision tip glue, and I am just going to add a light layer of glue to the back of the little flower centers that have the holes and add them to the solid pieces. This comes as a single die. And I love when die sets have the matching smaller pieces connected so that you can't lose them. I think all brands should do that forever. So thank you, Sizzix, for doing that. It is actually a game changer. This is when I pulled in those really thin little foam squares. I love this foam. I have it linked down in the supplies list for you. But these foam squares, it's a multi-pack. It comes in the larger and the smaller in one pack. They're super thin, but they are absolutely fabulous. And I used the smaller squares for the smaller flower and the bigger squares for the bigger flowers. A must-have. I will be repurchasing many and many of these sets. So once I got each of those flower centers put together, I added them right to the center of the flower. Again, there's no right or wrong way to line these up. You just kind of put them wherever you think they should go. And I kind of like that too. Sometimes it's nice to have dies where everything is pre-scored out, but sometimes it's nice to just not even have to stress about it. Just put it in the general center and you're good to go. This was a pretty repetitive process, but if you are like me and you like to craft while you're watching, videos or listening to audiobooks, maybe you're crafting right now while you are watching this, how awesome would that be? This is a really kind of easy thing to do because while you're doing something else too, because it is so repetitive. Now, it was time to start assembling, but I knew I needed to pick my sentiment, and I ended up going with the Merry definition. I just thought it was so cute. And again, I love that this is a Christmas card without being super obvious and in your face. I just think it's so unique. I definitely need to figure out what I'm going to do with that naughty stamp because that's too funny. Somewhere I have to have like some kind of little elf or, you know, like a naughty puppy doing something. I don't know. There's some funny card in my future with that naughty stamp. But for now, I went with Mary. I thought it was nice and sweet. I stamped it out in that same gathered twig ink multiple times. And I am just trimming down my cardstock, trying to get it pretty even from the left and the right. It didn't have to be exactly center, but I wanted it centered up at least kind of with the general definition. And then it looked too clean and pretty against my backdrop. So the easiest solution to fix that was to go in one more time with those gathered twig ink and just kind of ink blend the edges. Again, creating a vignette halo kind of feeling. So all of the darkness is on the outer part. You can still read the sentiment. You can still read the definition. But I just thought that this helped to tie in this panel with that back panel. I also inked up the edges. This isn't something I do often, but for something like this where I really wanted to kind of frame this piece and have it, it's interesting. I wanted it to blend in, but also stand out, right? I wanted it to look cohesive. I wanted it to look very intentional that it went with this background, but I still wanted it to stand out that like this is the sentiment look here. So having that extra depth of color right around the edges really helped to frame that, and it pulls your eye directly to it. I also love that I gave myself a little bit of a white border. You can see I wasn't sure if we were going vertical or horizontal. I ended up going vertical, so we're going, you might also call that portrait, right? We're going portrait for this, so we're having a side folding card. And I use those same thin foam squares on the back of my sentiment panel. I got that lined up pretty close to center. I like to kind of guesstimate where it's going to go and then double check it before I give it a good squish down. Now, when it was time to add all of my foliage, I tried my hardest to use the least amount of glue possible so that my fingers would not get all sticky and I would not get glue everywhere. It's debatable on how successful I was, but using the Lawn Fawn glue tube definitely does help to minimize it. And I really enjoyed layering some of this foliage under the sentiment space and some of it over the sentiment space. I think it's a really fun way to incorporate everything in and kind of make it look like one scene all together instead of just foliage stuck down randomly. I laid out all of my little leafy branches and my pine branch first, and then went in with my flowers just to make sure that nothing was going to actually cover up any of the words. And because I'd already put my foam squares inside my flowers, I decided to adhere them down flat with just some more liquid glue, kind of tucking in this smaller one. I did end up having an extra flower left over, but that's totally fine with me. I know that I will find a time to use it. I will definitely be making more cards like this. I love it, and I think it's a nice way to make Christmas cards in the summer when maybe my brain is not necessarily ready for Christmas, but it likes flowers, and it likes wood grain, and it likes pretty colors all year round. So this was a good way to kind of motivate me to get started on my Christmas card making. I have to tell you the truth, I usually procrastinate. So it was kind of satisfying to get this one started and kind of get the ball rolling on my Christmas card making already. I got those top branches kind of stuck into place as well. I like doing these opposite corners. I think it just creates such a beautiful frame. And now a lot of my leaves and flower pieces do stick out around and off of my card, but I don't mind this. I would just put it in a little bit of a bigger envelope, or this might be something that I hand deliver anyway. So keep that in mind. You could definitely go in with scissors and trim these, or tuck them a little bit closer in around your sentiment, and they would not hang off as much. I did go in with some of those gold stars and just kind of added them and tucked them around the sentiment and under some of those flowers. I just love this like rustic feel of these. I was very, very tempted to add some kind of glitter or shimmer to them. Definitely something to keep in mind if you love some shine. But that is our Christmas card ready to go. Thank you so much for coming to hang out with me. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any future Scrapbook Pal inspiration. Definitely go double check the blog. There'll be more information there, as well as tons of other crafty projects. I hope you guys have an absolutely amazing day and happy crafting.